Hello and welcome to Monday in Parliament. The main news from Westminster. Passions run high as MPs debate airdropping food and supplies to desperate Syrians.
What Britain stands for on the world stage is being challenged. This is a test. There is no risk-free course of action left, but I believe there's a right course of action.
If this House wants to carry out airdrops in a non-benign environment, expect our aircraft to be brought down.
Also on the programme, Labour MPs say the social care system is on the verge of collapse.
The Prime Minister didn't have an answer to this last Wednesday. When is the Minister responsible going to have an answer?
Yeah. And there's dismay over the unprecedented number of suicides in prison this year.
This disgraceful figure of suicides owes much to the situation which, frankly, the government has created.
But first, over the last 2 weeks, the Syrian government, backed by Russia and Iran, has intensified its mission to re-establish control over eastern Aleppo. Aleppo is the second largest city in Syria and one of the oldest cities in the world. The eastern area has been in the hands of rebels for 4 years. Life for ordinary citizens is brutal. Airstrikes have killed or injured thousands of people and destroyed homes and hospitals. Now food is running out, which means civilians, many of them children, may starve to death. There's been talk in past Commons debates about airdropping food and essential supplies into the area. But some MPs believe it's the only option left. A minister was summoned to the Commons to answer an urgent question on the matter.
The last functioning hospital was put out of action on the 19th of November. Humanitarian access has been deliberately blocked by the regime and its allies for over 4 months now, leading the 275,000 civilians in eastern Aleppo to face imminent starvation.
He said addressing the dire situation in Syria was a priority for the government.
There can be no military solution to this conflict. What is needed is for the regime and its backers to return to diplomacy and negotiations on political settlement based on transition away from President Assad.
The MP who secured the urgent statement said there was something they could do.
The government have always said that airdrops are a last resort, and I understand that. But Gareth Bailey, the UK Special Representative to Syria, has tweeted about Aleppo today. The situation in Aleppo could not be more dire. Every hospital out of service, official food stocks run out, nowhere for civilians to run. He called Aleppo a coffin. Does the Minister agree that the government then needs an urgent strategy to protect civilians? When hundreds of thousands of civilians are being starved and bombed into submission, we must consider airdrops. It's time for the last resort. Yep. Mr. Speaker, what Britain stands for on the world stage is being challenged. This is a test. There is no risk-free course of action left, but I believe there's a right course of action. Let us not stand and watch as one of the great cities of the world is destroyed. Let us not allow 100,000 children to starve in eastern Aleppo.
She must understand, and I think it's been repeated in this House before, that were we to do unilateral or even multilateral aid drops, it places us in harm's way and in conjunction with what is already a complicated air environment.
He harked back to August 2013 when the Commons voted against airstrikes in Syria.
Britain has the ability and indeed aspiration to play a significant role on the world stage. We, in 2013 in August, had that opportunity, Mr. Speaker, and we blinked. We had an opportunity there to hold Assad to account. And because of that, we've ended up in the situation whereby both Russia and Daesh have now come in. And the question I pose to this House, and to the honourable lady who screams from the seats, is that unless this Parliament gives the executive the support that we need, then our hands are tied on what we can do.
Let us be clear. Nobody in this House is underestimating the complexity and risks involved, but with no alternatives, with thousands facing death if they do not get immediate supplies of food and medical equipment, These are risks that we must be prepared to take. So can I ask the Minister once more, will he take the urgent steps required today to agree a plan for airdrops by British planes with the UN and our international partners, as has been called for by the White Helmets, whose representatives I also met last week?
She's now advocating that British airplanes, Hercules aircraft or otherwise, go into Syrian airspace and make those drops.
They'll be shot down.
They will be shot down, as my honourable friend, the member for the armed forces. I'm not aware that the UN has actually requested airdrops per se at the moment. I'm not saying that they will not be ruled out. I'm not saying who should actually do those airdrops as well. It could very well be that we can coordinate and make those happen. They're not being dismissed. I simply share with the House that it is hugely complicated, and having been in the armed forces, involved in airdrops on a number of occasions, many of the occasions when the drop zone is particularly small, the kit lands in the wrong place and goes to the very people that you don't actually want to receive it.
No practical challenge should be too tough. No political obstacles too insurmountable to do the right thing by these people whose suffering is growing day by day. And who could fail to be moved by the 7-year-old Bana Alabed, who is tweeting live from Aleppo when bombs are falling upon her, asking for help?
I've organised airdrops in a benign environment. And that's the ideal situation, because airdrops are low. They're not high, they're low. And aircraft carrying them out are very vulnerable. Now, if this House wants to carry out airdrops in a non-benign environment, expect our aircraft to be brought down. If that's the risk this Parliament wishes to take, please, in future, vote for it. Yeah. And everyone in this House should take responsibility for that vote when an RAF aircraft containing 7 or 8 people are brought into the ground and everyone is killed, because that is the responsibility this House will have to bear.
Bob Stewart speaking during an intense debate about airdrops into Syria. Now, the arguments about last week's autumn statement setting out the government's economic plans rumble on. Ministers have been accused of neglecting social care, practical support to help older and disabled adults live as independently as possible. Labour MPs say the system is on the verge of collapse, but ministers insist they are putting in enough money.
Yesterday, the former Health Secretary, Stephen Dorrell, commented on the Chancellor's autumn statement, saying that it was a mistake not to provide extra investment in the social care system, which is inadequately funded. Last week, directors of social services described social care as in real jeopardy, and the Conservative leader of Warwickshire said it is no exaggeration to say that our care and support system is in crisis. The Minister says he's providing extra money, but when is this government going to wake up and provide the funds that are actually needed to prevent the whole system from collapse?
Well, I can say that during the spending review last year, we consulted carefully with the sector. We spoke with the LGA and looked at length at what they said. They said that we should have £2.9 billion of extra funding available for adult social care across this spending period, and we've provided up to 3.5.
The Care Quality Commissioner said that the social care system's about to topple over. The Local Government Association says that councils can't cope with the cost pressures. And much of the funding the Minister's talked about is either repackaged funding or funding that won't kick in until late in this decade. When is he going to come clean about the scale of the crisis, take his head out of the sand and actually lobby the Treasury to make sure the promised money for 2020 is brought forward and we actually get to grips with this care crisis?
Well, I would say to the honourable gentleman that this is not repackaged money. This is new money for adult social care, up to £3.5 billion across this spending review period. He mentioned the LGA and their report. And what I would say in relation to that is that they're absolutely right that the key to this is better integration between social and health and social care. And the £1.5 billion we're providing through the Better Care Fund is the best way in which we continue to promote that.
The mood lightened briefly when the Speaker realised he had to choose between the Eagle sisters.
Well, I'm loath to come between sisters, and especially between twins. But Angela Eagle
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You may cause me some trouble later this evening. In the last 6 years, this government has cut social care funding by nearly £5 billion. In my own authority of Wirral, there's now a £3.5 million hole in the budget only halfway through the year. The system is on its knees, and there is an 18% increase in emergency admissions to hospital as a result of this. The Prime Minister didn't have an answer to this last Wednesday. When is the Minister responsible going to have an answer?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we have enabled councils to raise additional funding through the adult social care precept. But I would say to the honourable lady, this is all about priorities and the way in which local government allocates its finance. And what I would say to her is that she might want to have a word with her local council leader and their group, who've sought to spend £270,000 on a propaganda newspaper. Is that a good value for money when they're saying they need more for social care?
Maria Eagle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm very grateful to follow my sister, as I always have. Liverpool City Council, which covers most of my constituency, raises £146 million in council tax every year because of the council tax base that it has. This year it spent £151 million on adult social care, yet this government since 2010 and its predecessor has cut 58% of the budget that Liverpool City Council has to fulfil its statutory obligations. Is the Minister really saying that Liverpool City Council is in a position to spend any more on adult social care, which it needs to do without more money coming from central government?
Well, I would refer the honourable lady to the indicative allocations that have been made in terms of the Better Care Fund, which takes into account the ability for particular councils to raise council tax. I would also say to her that Liverpool, in terms of their average spending power per dwelling, gets £100 more than the national average, and she might want to also have a discussion with her council leader at how they improve the collection of council tax, which is well below the national average in Liverpool.
The local government minister, Marcus Jones. It's just come to light that low-income families with a disabled child have lost out on thousands of pounds in tax credit payments. The underpayments, which were between 2011 and 2014, occurred after the Department for Work and Pensions failed to share data with Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs. HMRC said it would repay money owed for last year, but not earlier years. One MP raised the issue with the Speaker as a point of order.
Over the weekend, it was revealed that thousands of families with disabled children, including in my own constituency, have lost out up to £4,400 a year in tax credits after an administrative error by the DWP. Terrible. This is as a result of the DWP failing to inform HMRC about families' eligibility for the award over a 3-year period, and has resulted in an estimated 28,000 families where children qualified for DLA during 2011 to 2014 missing out on an additional tax credit premium of between £60 and £84 a week. At last week's autumn statement, the government set aside £360 million over 6 years to ensure these families who were eligible for child disability tax credits could be awarded this money. However, the payments will be backdated only to April 2016, meaning individual families may have lost out on the entitlement totalling up to £25,000 over the past 5 years. Mr Speaker, can I ask if you have had any indication from the Work and Pensions Secretary or any other minister that they will come to this House and make a statement so we can clarify the impact upon our constituents? And if not, could you give us any other guidance on how we might raise this issue in this House and scrutinise ministers on it at the earliest opportunity?
Well, I'm grateful to the honourable lady for her point of order and for her courtesy in offering me some advance notice of it. The short answer to the inquiry towards the end of her point of order as to whether I have received any indication of a likely ministerial statement on the matter is no.
But he suggested raising the matter with Treasury ministers or trying to secure a debate in Westminster Hall. You're watching Monday in Parliament with me, Christina Cooper. A record number of inmates have taken their own lives in prisons in England and Wales this year. That's according to the prison reform charity, the Howard League. The Howard League said there had been 102 suicides so far in 2016, the highest since its records began in 1978. The Labour peer Lord Beecham wanted to know what action the government was going to take.
In its Prisons White Paper, the government devotes all of 4 paragraphs to health issues and promises a review. Given the role of NHS England and Public Health England, they promise a joint approach to the commissioning of prison health services, with responsibility for budgetary and clinical decisions and quality remaining with commissioners and providers, and with governors taking a joint responsibility. But most crucially, there's no mention of any additional funding in the context of NHS, which is also in the throes of a growing crisis, and for which no extra funding was promised in the autumn statement. Has the Ministry of Justice made any estimate of the cost of tackling the health crisis in our prisons? And will the Department of Health foot the bill, thereby increasing the pressure on the NHS? Isn't it high time for the government to recognise that extra funding needs to be found for the prison health service and not at the expense of the mainstream NHS budget?
My Lords, I do accept that we are in a very serious situation, and my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State, has publicly acknowledged that the levels of violence in our prisons are too high. She has also said that we are addressing it, and that is what the White Paper set out to do with a comprehensive reform of our prison system. That is why she made it quite clear that there would be an extra 2,500 extra officers by 2018. I accept 2018 is some way off, and so that is why she made it quite clear that there would be, starting with the most challenging prisons, an extra 400 officers by March of next year.
The crisis requires urgent action. Many more staff in weeks and very few months, not years. An end to prisoners having to spend 23 hours in their cells. An end to mental health prisoners being placed in segregation when we need more secure hospital places. A serious attack on overcrowding starting immediately.
I do wish that noble lords, the ministers, would stop talking about extra staff. They are not extra staff, but they are replacement staff, which will willfully cut, as the noble Lord Marks has said. I do wish, too, that ministers would stop taking a long-term view of what has been exposed as being a crisis by successive chief inspectors of prisons over many years and has been ignored. And most recently, it was raised by the Prison Governors Association, who called for a public inquiry into the state of our prisons. And they should know, because they are on the receiving end of what is happening in prisons. This disgraceful figure of suicides owes much to the situation which, frankly, the government has created.
I do hope that the noble Lord, who I know has more expertise in this than anyone else, that the noble Lord will accept that we are doing all that we can in this matter.
Effective, humane and cost-effective solution to this does not lie inside the prisons at all, or how you treat prisoners. It depends on how you treat young people, so that they do not become criminals. And the path to criminality is easily detected as it begins, very frequently simply in being excluded from school and driven onto the streets without supervision. Small resources would have big results.
Staying with the Lords, Labour peers have been demanding to know more about any assurances given to Nissan by ministers in the days before the Japanese firm confirmed it would be expanding its car-making operations in the northeast of England. Last month, Nissan revealed plans to manufacture 2 new models at its Sunderland plant, safeguarding more than 7,000 jobs.
This question was originally put down when assurances were given to Nissan. Yeah. Regarding Brexit and the EU. Now, it remains topical because everybody else is still waiting for a reply. So, will the government confront this uncertainty? Will they show some leadership and give the sense of direction that's needed to enable and encourage the investment and the organisation so that everybody else can get on with the job of raising the productivity that we so desperately need.
My Lords, as we made clear, we will be publishing an industrial strategy. We will be publishing it later this year, and there aren't many days to go before the year ends, and the noble Lord can wait for that occasion.
My Lords, does the Government agree that any special Brexit deal for Nissan, as intimated by the noble Lord who asked the question, or any special deal for any other car makers of our car makers isn't even necessary, because EU car makers sell us 2.4 cars for every car we sell them, and they enjoy 64% of our domestic car makers. So, and also, my Lords, aren't there 2.5 million more jobs in the EU selling things to us than we have selling things to them? So isn't it in the EU's interest to continue in free trade with us in the car and indeed other sectors?
My Lords, we look forward to Nissan producing as many cars as they do. We are grateful for the fact that they have put such faith in the North East and in this country, and 7,000 jobs and a great many others in the supply stream are dependent on that. My Lords, we also look forward to continuing to trade freely with Europe.
My Lords, is the noble Lord the Minister aware that some 200 American companies and 50 companies from Japan have located in Wales in order to sell into the European market, and that any system of financial aid to industry has to be open, equally accessible and transparent, so that companies like Ford, Toyota, Airbus and Siemens aren't disadvantaged in regard to their competitors?
My Lords, as my noble friend, as my right honourable friend made clear in another place, there has been no compensation package for Nissan.
Given that the need for assurances arises wholly and solely out of this country's impending departure from the European Union and the single market, why does the government feel so inhibited about publicising, so that it can be examined, the assurances given to see whether there is, in fact, a special deal, and maybe it could be imparted to all of the other companies that will be affected?
My Lords, what I made clear was that there was no compensation package to Nissan. That has been something that my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State, made clear, and my noble friend has made clear when she repeated that statement on the 30th of October.
And finally, measures to restrict internet pornography so children do not find it by accident will be among the most robust in the world, according to the government. But the Culture Minister Matthew Hancock admitted that adult content on platforms such as Twitter will not be covered by the Digital Economy Bill. The bill was back in the Commons after being scrutinised in detail by a committee.
The introduction of a new law requiring appropriate age verification measures for online pornography is a bold step, and it has many challenges. It represents the first stage of ensuring commercial providers of pornographic material are rightly held responsible for what they provide and profit from. When the internet brings incredible and unlimited opportunities, it also has the potential to change the way younger generations grow up to understand and experience healthy relationships. And delivering on this manifesto commitment to stop children and young people's access to online pornographic sites remains our priority. We want to get this right, and the provisions in this bill enable us, I believe, to do that.
One of the means by which young people are now accessing pornography more and more is through social media and sites like Twitter. Can he say how his age verification requirements are going to apply to Twitter?
Well, the age verification requirements apply to the commercial provision of pornography. Now, commercial provision is not only paid for, it's also that which is provided for a commercial return. There is a difference between websites that provide commercial pornography and platforms on which others can upload images. And getting this right around that second group is much harder than around the first group.
One of the things that this bill does is it deals with the publication of pornography. But one of the things that we need to do is to help children be more resilient and actually understand that these images are not normal sexual behaviour, are the kind of, violence that should not be part of relationships. And yet, when we look at the research by NSPCC and others, we learn that children, particularly boys, think this is normal. What discussions has he had with the Department of Education to try and build greater resilience amongst children to some of the images that, despite the efforts in this bill, they will see?
The Minister replied that he entirely agreed, and conversations on this were taking place with the Department for Education. No more conversations from us, though, because that's it from Monday in Parliament. Alicia McCarthy will be here for the rest of the week, but from me, Christina Cooper, goodbye.